First Lieutenant George M. Papa, United States Army, Vietnam. Had the honor and pleasure of meeting George Papa in Scottsdale, Arizona this past April. April the 19th, 2024, I was down there for a week interviewing veterans, and you've seen some of the stories already on this Voices of History channel. But George was an infantry platoon leader. He was a frontline infantry lieutenant in Vietnam from 1970 to 71, spent 13 months there, and he served with the 1st of the 46th Infantry Battalion, Alpha Company 3rd Platoon, which was part of the 196th Light Infantry Brigade. George provides a real boots-on-the-ground frontline story about what happened in Vietnam with his men. Lost a lot of men, folks, and he tells just an amazing story. He actually wrote a book, The Vietnam Jungle Speaks. I'll show you a cover of it here. A conclusive view of what it was like, search and destroy missions, and what he encountered as a platoon commander, a leader of his troops, into battle in Vietnam at the height of the war. Oh boy, it's just a tremendous story. I've been working on this story for the last few days and just really reliving it again as he told me it. And George, thank you for opening up and sharing your story like this. We had conversed for several months, and he sent me pictures, and you'll see him after this introduction. But just one of the best Vietnam stories that I have, folks, and I know that you'll embrace it, and you'll think so too. So I want to thank Michael and Darlene Sarofsky and Trish Care Hansen at Hansen Desert Hills in Scottsdale, Arizona, where we did all of our interviews. Thank you all again for allowing me the opportunity to interview these veterans. There's 8 now that we've shown on this channel. This is the 8th one. And you guys, I couldn't have done it without you. So because of your support of my work, sponsoring my time down in Arizona, we were able to record these stories for history's sake and now to share them with the world. So I appreciate all of you. God bless you, and I hope we can work together again, possibly come back down in January and do some more interviews and some school programs. So more information on that later. Folks, if you'd like to sponsor a story or honor a loved one in your family who has served in the military, please contact me. We can do that. We can do a nice introduction with some pictures of them and tell a little bit about their service if you want to honor them. I mean, I know there's a lot of you out there that want to do that. So if you want to donate to this work, it's greatly appreciated. There's always information in the video descriptions of my videos and in the comment section of every video that I do. Or you can go to larrycappetto.com, my website, and you can donate from there and listen to Voices of History Radio, which is being broadcast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across the world. This story, along with all the others, are on that radio station, so I would invite you to tune into that and help support that. It's listener supported. But my heart's full, folks. We're in a heavy time right now in our country, fighting for the same freedoms that our veterans fought for. So much going on right now, and I thank my God I can serve Him and my country through the lens of my camera. And I just am so grateful for my work and my veterans. And I say God bless all of you that have helped me on this journey. Sit back, let's honor George Papa now. This is an amazing story, like I said. Check out his book, The Vietnam Jungle Speaks. I'll talk about it in the interview, at the end of the interview. This went well over an hour, about an hour and a half, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So let me hear from you, send me a comment, and I'll talk to you in my next broadcast. God bless you.
What can I do for you?
No, I'm impressed. I mean,
How old do you think I am?
75?
Try 80.
Are you 80?
A little over.
You look good. I know your name's Papa, but were you one of the older fellas during Vietnam?
Well, I was...
Here, that's a good first question. Let me turn everything on. Okay, go ahead. Answer that question. Were you the oldest of your group?
Oh, no, there were others that were older. I was roughly 26 years old.
Okay.
Married. Had a little son back at home. He was 6 months old. And as far as being the oldest, no, there were several that were older than me. But I was a first lieutenant. I was in the infantry. I was in the jungle in Vietnam, and I was in charge of 3rd Platoon. Now, every company typically has maybe 130 or maybe 135 men, and it's divided up into 3 platoons, and each platoon is authorized to have 43 men, but we never had more than 35, and once we got shot up down to 14 men. And so we've got these 3 platoons, and each platoon has 3 squads. And each squad is commanded by a sergeant, and each squad has 2 machine gunners, 2 assistant machine gunners, 2 radio men, and a squad leader and a lieutenant. And so these companies are part of a battalion, and a battalion actually has 4 companies. You got Alpha Company, Bravo Company, Charlie Company, Delta Company. We were with the Alpha Company. And the way it works is you got your battalion headquarters that's out there in the jungle, and it's called an LZ. And every LZ, that stands for landing zone, that pertains to where a battalion headquarters is located. And they're roughly 10, maybe 12 miles apart, so that they can kind of have supporting artillery for each other. So our tactics, the way our outfit operated, we're located at this battalion headquarters. It was LZ Professional. Later it got its name changed and got moved out further out into the jungle, and it became known as LZ Marianne. But these 4 companies, one company stays on the hill and supports security for the hill. You got a bunker line, you got bunkers, and that's where the artillery is, that's where the mortars are, that's where the battalion headquarters is. The other 3 companies are either airlifted out into the jungle, or else they walk out into the jungle, and then they fight their way back, and they're out in the jungle for a total of approximately 15 days. And so you spend 15 days out there in the jungle, and then you spend 5 days on the hill. But that's not exactly normal, because one time we were out there for 25 days. And they felt so sorry for us, they said, we're sending you some new washed uniforms, just take the ones off you got and burn them. And so anyway, that's what happened. But while you're out there in the jungle, approximately every 3 days, you get a resupply by helicopter. And we love those helicopters. I mean, we couldn't have fought the war without those helicopters. They're sitting ducks, and they're very dangerous. They're big targets, but they come in and they hover and kick off the sea rations, kick off the letters, your replacement ammunition, stuff like that, and they're gone, and then you keep on operating. So our job was to interdict enemy soldiers that were coming down south from North Vietnam, and everybody says the Ho Chi Minh Trail. There were probably a dozen or more Ho Chi Minh trails. They had them coming down through Cambodia, they had them coming down through Vietnam, and the soldiers that were coming down, their job was to get to the south where the capital was and try to overtake the capital. Our job was to try to stop them from getting there. So that's basically the way it was in the infantry. We were not mechanized, we didn't have APCs, we didn't have tanks. We were just boots on the ground soldiers going through the jungle. The enemy was looking for us, we're looking for them. It was a big cat and mouse game.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite an introduction. Let's go back to high school. What year did you graduate from high school?
1961, Snowflake, Arizona, up in northern Arizona. And it was a little high school, and it actually served all the little communities around, such as Snowflake, Taylor, Overgard, Heber, Sholo. And so all of them got bussed in. And if you went to Snowflake Union High School back in the 1960s and 50s, you knew everybody on the mountain and what color the car their parents drove and what color car their dog was and all that sort of thing. So it was just kind of a great big happy family.
Yeah. So that was before Vietnam was going. So at what point in your life did you start hearing about Vietnam, and then did you feel an obligation to either enlist or were you drafted?
Oh no, I had no interest in enlisting. I had no interest in war games. I actually went to ASU, Arizona State University, and it was mandatory to, at that time, go to ROTC. And of course, they were giving us updates, and the war was in its infancy stage. Advisors were in Vietnam, and it was low key. And finally, when the war erupted during the Johnson administration, it escalated and it became a great big, shall I say, military action, and it grew and grew. But in those days, there was a system where if you enlisted for 4 years, you would not become an 11 Bravo. You would not be in the infantry. So my cousin and I, we went from Snowflake, jumped in my 1966 Chevrolet Impala. We go down to Phoenix. We enlisted for 4 years. We enlisted in the Army Security Agency. And this was an elite organization. It was a big spy outfit. And they trained us for 6 months. My job after basic training was to learn how to do Morse code and how to run rhombic antennas, be stationed in Germany to copy troop movements from Russia. It was a desk job, weekends off, tour Europe. My wife could be with me, wonderful. So at one point, however, my commanding officer came and says, PFC Papa, you kind of got your head screwed on a little bit straight, and you show what we're looking for in terms of leadership. We would like to fill out the papers for you, if you'll agree, and you'll go to officer candidate school and you'll graduate. And it doesn't matter which school you go to, whether it's infantry or tanks or artillery or engineers. When you graduate and become a second lieutenant, you will not be commissioned into the service per se. You'll be commissioned back into military intelligence. Okay, fine. So I went to infantry OCS and I graduated. And they called me in, they said, Lieutenant Papa, be advised that we're losing a whole lot of lieutenants in Vietnam. You've been trained in the infantry, you will stay in the infantry. So that's what I did, even though they knew very well my orders were to go back to military intelligence. But the very thing that I was trying to avoid, I got sucked right into the middle of it. I'm not going to say that was terribly bad because I did learn some lessons. I mean, the hard way. You're dealing with all this death and destruction and all these surprises, and you got to make split-second decisions. Now, there was one other little interesting thing that pertained to me before I even joined the military. I volunteered to serve my church. And I actually went to put in my papers. I belonged to the LDS Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I didn't know where they were going to send me. They sent me to Argentina. So I learned how to speak Spanish, and I'm trying to preach the gospel to anybody that'll listen. Now I'm in Vietnam, and I'm trying to shoot anybody I see. Now that's a pretty big difference.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm just listening to you, and how you tell it is so detailed. So you're a first lieutenant now.
A first lieutenant. Now, when you graduate, you become a second lieutenant.
Right.
And if you stay alive, you don't get your head shot off, after 12 months to the day, you become a first lieutenant. And then after that, you have to re-up, and it usually takes about 4 years to make captain. I had no interest in being a lifer, staying in for the rest of my life, making a career. I did my duty, got out, came home, where my wife and I were raising our family. And 15 years later, here comes this movie by Oliver Stone, and it was called Platoon, Academy Award winning, Best Picture of the Year, 1986. And I said, Debbie, I know about platoons, let's go watch this movie. So we did, and I was so shocked. It was unbelievable. They didn't even have the uniforms right. They didn't have the order of battle correct. The entire thing was over the top. It was exaggerated. It didn't even have, it was all about drugs and all about internal conflicts. And it just was so hyper. I was so upset and disgusted. I said, I can do better than that. And that's why I wrote my book.
Good for you. I totally agree. Hollywood never gets it right. And how can they depict? Have you seen anything in Hollywood in your whole life that even maybe came close to combat?
Sadly, there were some that were better than others, but most of them were exaggerated, over the top. They didn't capture the real truth. And so when I wrote my book, and I know there are many, many books, and there are movies, and I haven't read them all, I haven't seen them all. There's Full Metal Jacket, We Were Brothers, Hamburger Hill. But in my particular book, what I do is I take the audience on 2 search and destroy missions. And my book is actually written in a modified screenplay format instead of just regular prose. And I throw in a lot of pictures, and I create a scene. I don't have chapters, I have scenes. I describe what's going on in the scene, and then I put in the dialogue of who's talking to and what they say. And if I didn't see it, if I didn't hear it, I didn't put it in the book. I mean, I wanted to be absolutely as accurate as possible, and I even got help from the Pentagon to give certain details, especially about the overrun of LC Marianne. Now, that was a big deal. That happened on March 28, 1971. And the battle lasted about 45 minutes. It began at 2 o'clock in the morning. And real quick, there were 109 casualties of American forces, and they were caught absolutely flat-footed. They weren't doing their sit reps. They didn't have their concertina wire up. They didn't have their Claymore mines out. They thought they were on R&R. I wasn't right there on the hill exactly when it happened, or I would have been caught up in all of this great big nonsense. But I wanted to at least have the American public know what it's like in terms of a major attack of that nature. I called up the Pentagon, talked to a certain major, and because there were these court-martials of all these officers that were derelict in their conduct of their duty, I knew there were depositions, I knew there were courts and testimonies, so I got copies of that, plus pictures from the Pentagon, and I was able to recreate that battle right from the first minute when the gas came in, when the frags came in, when the zappers came in, where they came from. They were wearing American uniforms, had black mustaches painted on, so they took full control. They were a master of deception, and the poor guys on the hill, they didn't know who they were shooting at. Is this the enemy, or are these the friendlies?
Give me a condensed version, because of time, of one of those search and destroy missions.
Well, I guess the one that sticks out the most in my mind, we were walking through the jungle, and we came to a hooch. And this is in a free fire zone. In other words, anybody there is considered to be the enemy, and you fire first. You don't have to wait till you're fired upon. That's the way the rules were along the coast. So we're deep out in the jungle. This is up by Da Nang in I Corps. And here's this little hooch, and it was just a kind of small building, had a thatch roof, and no furniture, pigs and chickens out there. And in the middle of the floor, there was a hole. We call it a spider hole. It's where whoever's in that hooch can get down in the ground if any bombs start flying around. So my point man walks up and he hollers out and he says, "Lot A." That means come here. There wasn't any noise. So he pulls out a grenade, flips the pin, throws it in, boom. And then he went in to see what in the world's going on. And he said, "Oh, there's a lady down here and she's killed. And she's covered up a little baby and the baby's got its foot blown off, but I'm going to hand up the baby. The baby's still alive." So I'm the one that received that little baby, and it looked like about 6 months, little boy. And I had a little boy, 6 months old myself. And how would I feel if my wife was shot and killed and my baby was gone and I come home as the husband and I see my animals are shot up, my house tried to be burned down, my wife is gone, I don't know whatever happened to him. Now that's the bad news. And I'm going to tell you the good news. I happen to believe in God, and I happen to believe in paradise, life after death, and I'm going to look at that family and I'm going to apologize and I'm going to tell them what happened, and then I'm going to share the word and we'll go from there.
Did you do that?
Well, I haven't died yet.
Okay.
But when I go to paradise, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay. Continue with that story, search and destroy.
Well, the little boy, I went out into the, looked around and found some cloth, and I found a little can of condensed milk. And the cloth we tore it up for diapers, handed the little boy off to the medics. And he became a favorite in our platoon. Everybody wanted to get on the phone. He got a nickname. He was called Sergeant Rock. How's Sergeant Rock doing? Well, he's still alive, doing well. So we had to carry him with us for, more or less day and a half, 2 days, till we could get to a resupply spot. And I took a little piece of cardboard and wrote a note. We found this baby out in the jungle. Took a piece of wire and wrapped it around his little ankle. His foot, the top part of his foot was gone. So he was a cripple for the rest of his life. But anyway, he was a great little kid, and he was brave, and he didn't cry a whole lot. So you asked me to continue the story, that's what happened.
Yeah. But from a combat perspective, though, okay, so you worked with the Huey helicopters, I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you did...
Loaches, cranes, and also the most of them were the Hueys.
Mm-hmm. How many combat assaults do you think you flew over there? 10, 100?
No, probably at least a dozen. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we walked off the hill, sometimes we were airlifted off the hill. One time we were supposed to be airlifted to go from Chulai to a certain spot, but we were out in the jungle, and we waited and waited, and finally this Chinook showed up. And this is one of these things got 2 rotors on it, right. And the back tail end drops down and the whole platoon can walk on. So we walked on, we'd been waiting, and my men were anxious, they were nervous, we're out in the jungle, and making all this noise. And one of the pilots motioned to me, because I'm the lieutenant in charge, and he handed me a headset, and he says, "Lieutenant, you got to kick your men off. We just got orders that you've got to get off. We've got to go to another place, pick up another platoon. We'll come back in about maybe an hour. We'll pick you up." So I had to boot them off. And they were mad. You know, that soldiers are very capable of venting their frustration. So we waited and waited, and nothing happened. They didn't come. And finally, there were 6 little Hueys that showed up. Now, these Hueys are made for combat. They got the 2 machine gunners, they got the 2 pilots, they got a crew chief. The doors are taken off, the seats are taken out. You got 6 seconds, boom, get on or you're going to be left. Well, we got on these 6 little Hueys, and I motioned to the pilot and I yelled at him, and he handed me this headset, and I said, "What happened to the Chinook that was supposed to pick us up?" He said, "Oh, don't you know?" I said, "I have no idea." He said, "Well, it loaded up this other platoon, and as it was rising up, it got hit by a sniper that punctured through the hydraulic lines. They crashed, killed everybody on the plane, plus 2 more on the ground."
Wow. When you're going on a combat assault, I mean, normally you don't know if it's a hot LZ, right? I'm sure you flew into some hot LZs.
Well, you not only do you fly in, but you have to fly out. And sometimes I was the guy that would pop smoke when they're going to land, just so that they would know the right spot to come down. And one time I was guiding it in, I was bringing my rifle down, to motion, and all of a sudden I heard pop, pop, pop. Now AK-47s, they have a little pop sound to them. And you can distinguish very easily a AK-47 round as opposed to an M16 round. So man, I just waved that off. I didn't want to jeopardize a whole helicopter with people on it, with snipers. And so that's what happened.
What comes to mind, George, what comes to mind when I ask you, what was your most difficult mission in Vietnam?
Well, they all run together. They were all about the same. The big thing that's in everybody's mind is, okay, am I going to come back? Mm-hmm. And I guess one of the saddest days was I had a fine RTO. He was a radio telephone operator, and we became friends. He had no business being in Vietnam. He had a wealthy family. They owned a chain of really nice jewelry stores in California. He had a degree from Southern Cal, and here he is carrying a radio. And we had this little river to cross, and then we climb a hill to go up to LZ Marianne. And darn if we didn't run into a couple of snipers, and he got killed. Mm. And it was real quick. It was just a sad day. And I was standing real close to him when it happened. And years later, it must have been 40 years later, my wife, Debbie, she's pretty articulate and pretty good about doing research. And she found out that his wife, her name was Dagmar, they were going to meet on R&R as soon as he climbed this hill and go to Hawaii. But here he is dead. And of course she was devastated about that. And here we are talking roughly many years later, 40 years later. And her first question was, did he suffer? And I was able to tell her that no, it was quick and he did not suffer. I had a lieutenant friend, Lieutenant Paulson. He's the one that took me on my first mission. I OJT'd with him. And he's with his platoon later. They're going through the jungle, and all of a sudden they took some enemy fire, and the machine gunner went berserk. And he started just locking and loading, shooting and climbing and clawing and running up this hill. Well, the platoon went after him, and Lieutenant Paulson followed, and Lieutenant Paulson got shot on the side of the face, peeled his whole side of his face off, and he suffered for 3 hours. He couldn't get a helicopter to come in to air vac him or any kind of aid or assistance. And finally it came, but he bled to death about 10 minutes before it hit down. Those are kind of things that are just not right. Mm-hmm. But I gotta say that in my particular case, I know that there are a lot of soldiers that came back from the world, to the world from Vietnam. And they had done things that were, shall I say, contrary to decency. There was a lot of drugs involved, a lot of alcohol involved, a lot of moral transgressions, but I didn't want to disgrace my family, my uncles that had served in the war, my parents, and I can talk about it. And I can talk about it freely. I can give my perspective. And I'm grateful to the dear Lord that I'm not afflicted with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And that's the way it is. Anything that I might have learned, anything that I might have absorbed, I'm happy to pass it on. Now, when I got back to the world and I started researching my book, I got into it pretty deep. And what I discovered was that, and I'm not the first one to say this, but that was actually a religious war between the majority Buddhists and the minority Catholics. And when I say the majority Buddhists, the country was Buddhist. But the French were there first, and they occupied the country for about 100 years. And they owned the plantations, they owned the schools, the government, and they were in charge. And over the years, there were a number of Vietnamese upper-class citizens that said, well, we can't whip them, we better join them. So they converted to the Catholic Church. And then in 1955, when the French lost the Battle of Dien Bien Phu and went back to France, all of their possessions fell into the hands of these converted Roman Catholic members. And what happened is if a person wanted to vote, or if a person wanted to get a good job or get a good education or own significant property, they had to be a Catholic. And it was a mess. So the Buddhists were disenfranchised. First they had to whip the French, then they had to whip us. And so what I'm saying is, like I say, I'm not the first one to say this, but the problem was that we fought on the wrong side. And the only people that really won that war were the American industrialists that were able to manufacture all the tanks and jeeps and trucks and bombs and bullets and sell them to the government for major profits. They didn't care how many Iowa farm boys got killed out in the battle. They'd just soon that war went on forever. And I'll share this, and I mentioned it in my book. Word started getting back to Washington that things weren't working out right. So they sent a cabinet member, Henry Cabot Lodge. He was an ambassador type individual. And he started checking it out. And he called in a fellow by the name of Big Min, who was one of the top generals for the South Vietnamese Army. And explained his situation. Big Min says, well, I think I can solve that. And so Henry Cabot Lodge says, what's it going to take? He says, well, I think I can do it for about $40,000. All right, here's $40,000. So Big Min, he gets a couple of his lieutenants and fellow officers, and they get in an APC, and they drive up to the presidential palace, and they knock on the door and rush in, and quick, you got to get in this APC, you're under attack, we got to bring you to safety. So the two brothers, Diem brothers, they jump in the APC. They were the ones that were the dictators. And as soon as they got inside, they were bayoneted, shot dead. That took care of that problem. So the American government put Big Min in charge, and he turned out to be worse than they were. And there was just regime change after regime change, and that's what happened. If there had been some diplomacy, if they had sat down to begin with and said, how can we make this place better for all concerned, that whole war, in my opinion, could have been avoided.
Wow.
57,000 names on the wall for nothing.
Can you define combat?
Well, yeah, you're in a great big fight and you're having incoming bullets and you're firing back, and hopefully you can prevail and still be alive the next day. I'll tell you one other event that happened. We were going through the jungle and we came to a valley, and we were walking kind of on the edge, and I knew there was a little river over on the other side. And it was hot and muggy, and we're out of energy. Everybody's tired and thirsty, and we didn't have any water. Everybody carries probably 6 or 7 canteens. And so I selected 8 or 9 men to load up canteens and go across this valley, get water, and come back. And when we joined, there was this hill there, and I said, well, we're just going to set up a night defensive position. We're going to be a little bit early. Everybody's happy about that. And we're up on this hill. And while we're getting ready, putting out our mosquito nets and getting ready to, chow down, I stand up and I look over this little jungle, and I see 4 enemy soldiers that are trying to figure out which way we went. They're following our tracks. Some of us went this way, some came back, some went this way. They're trying to figure out which way to go. But they're kind of spread apart. And so I decided, hey, war's war. We better shoot them before they shoot us. And I knew they were going to collect eventually and talk about it. So I had my whole platoon lined up. And I said, I'm the one that's going to give the signal to fire. And I called up our captain. I told him what was going on. He got mad at me. He said, why aren't you firing right now? Get them before they get away. I said, I'm running this war. Boom. I hung up. And sure enough, they came together, and I gave the command to fire. We set out a rain of fire. I mean, it just peppered everything. So that's what combat's all about.
How do men die in the battlefield?
Well, they're shot and they drop. There's 2 ways that basically you can get killed in Vietnam. One is by a booby trap, one is by some kind of artillery fire or mortar fire or rifle fire. A lot of people got killed in helicopter crashes. And there's always surprises. In fact, 2 or 3 surprises every day.
Did you have much interaction with the medics or even chaplains that were there for the wounded or the dying?
Not so much chaplains. One time, I'll tell you this little story. We were walking through the jungle and it stopped. I normally walk number 5 in the line. And the 2-point man, the first point man he's looking right in front to see if there's any booby traps. The second one behind him is looking out to the front to see what's out there and farther away. And it was hot, it was muggy, it was very humid. And so everybody stopped. So I went up front to try to check out what the situation was. My 2-point men were sprawled out on the ground. They were exhausted, and one of them looked up and he says, Lieutenant, we're beat. We can't go another step. There's nobody else to walk point but me. So I said, all right, we'll keep on going, but I'll be the one to walk point. We didn't go more than probably 50 or 60 yards, and I saw something shiny up there. Glint. And I motioned for one of my squads to come up, and we went up to investigate. There was a whole stack, probably 15 rockets still in their canister, Russian writing all over them, and we captured them. Nobody was around. It was just a real slick deal. We found this cache of rockets, and no doubt we saved quite a few lives. They would have been fired off to rain down on the big airfield there at Chu Lai, and who knows what kind of damage would have resulted. But we called our captain, I talked to him, he called battalion called brigade and said, hold them, we're going to send a helicopter, we're going to pick them up. And they sent a chaplain to see if anybody wanted the last rites. I thought that was kind of funny that they would think to send out a chaplain, because in their mind this was a big, big battle, but it was just a pickup thing was all it was.
So how many men are under your command during these, what you're telling me?
Well, you're authorized to have 43 men, but we never had more than 35. And like I said, once we got shot up down to about 14.
So you're a platoon commander, correct? Mm-hmm. Platoon. Tell me again the years you were there, 68, 69?
No, I was there from 1970 and 1970, 71. A tour of duty is 13 months to the day. And that was different from the Second World War. You're in for the duration during the war. 3 years, 4 years. But that's why we had an awful lot of turnover. above and beyond the dead and the wounded, you've got people that are on R&R, people that are rotating in, people that are rotating out. In fact, in 1971, some of the divisions down south, Big Red One, and they were already derosing. They were already being deactivated. And if any soldier had less than 10 months of tour duty, they stayed in and were rotated up to north. But if they had less, then if they were short, shall we say, then they just went home.
Okay. So you're a little over a year you were there?
I was there 13 months.
Yeah, okay. The Vietnam Jungle Speaks. This is your book.
That's my book.
Tell me about that cover picture.
Well, that is very, very typical. That's not a picture that I took. That is a standard picture, but it shows a helicopter hovering above the ground, and then the men are jumping off, and all of a sudden the helicopter takes off, and the men are out there by themselves, and their job is to work their way back to the battalion, LZ, and then at that point be reinserted again, start all over again.
So as a commander, I mean, what's the pickup and the drop-off like? Do you know you're going to a hot LZ? Do you just, I mean, these are called combat assaults?
Once you get on, it's anybody's guess. You might get a change of orders right while you're flying to point B, and you're going to go instead to point C over here. That's been known to happen. That's just one of the surprises that can occur at any time, at any moment.
What are your troops like? I mean, I'm assuming you work with certain people. I saw pictures of those that have survived some of these attacks and things. But as far as the troops going, you got about what, 7 troops on a Huey, pretty much, with the crew?
6 to 7. Now, when a troop is out on the field, one of the things that people don't think about is the fact that anything you own, you've got to carry it. You got to have your weapon, you got to have your steel pot, you got to have your ammunition, you got to have your C rations. If you want to write letters, if you want to read a book, all of that stuff. And you do have a kind of a backpack. It's a little frame made out of aluminum. It's got some netting on it. That thing weighs, and then you got to carry all this water. You're carrying maybe 3 gallons of water in these canteens. A gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. When you add it all up, and then you got to carry something extra besides that, such as composition C4, extra couple of mortar rounds, a base plate. You're carrying on the average somewhere between 85 and 90 pounds. And then you got to deal with these leeches. A leech is a big bug, and it's got a big mouth, and it hooks onto your skin and shoots in some anticoagulant, and so you start flowing blood, and this leech starts sucking it, and when it's full, it falls off, but you keep on bleeding. And you wake up in the middle of the night, you got a big blood spot up here, you got a big blood spot over here, where a leech attacked you. It doesn't hurt, you don't even know it's there, but you have to deal with it.
That's in the jungle, right?
That's in the jungle.
Yeah, you spent your time in the jungle.
Yes. And you don't even know what day of the week it is. You're living like maybe 2 notches below an animal. I didn't know if it was Sunday or Monday or what, or holidays come and go. It's you don't have a chance to take a shower or clean up, shave. That's the way it is.
So they're all looking up to you, right? I mean, in a company or a platoon, is there a sergeant and then there's a lieutenant?
Well, you got your captain, and
over the platoon, over the company.
He's over the whole company.
Okay.
Now, typically, we're assigned to a company, and half the time we're dealing at platoon strength. The rest of the time we're dealing at company strength, depending on the mission. And so the captain is in charge of the 3 platoons. And then there's a lieutenant in charge of each platoon. And the way it works out is in terms of the overall numbers, it varies from platoon to typically maybe 25 men. And you're supposed to walk through the jungle about 15 feet apart because you don't want to be bunched up. You're a bigger target. But a lot of times you just have to play it by ear and follow your instinct.
As you're talking, I've got so many thoughts in my head, but I'm just intrigued by your role in Vietnam as a first lieutenant, combat. I mean, to me, you probably saw it all.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and you seem to have a very good focus on what you're doing, and you said you didn't suffer from PTSD.
Well, I considered my job to be essentially keep as many of my men alive as I could. Now, the vast majority of there's two kinds of wounds, a bad wound and a not so bad wound. A bad wound is when you get an arm or a leg blown off or shot through the midsection. Serious wound. Under those circumstances, the war's over, you go back to the world. But a not so bad wound is just a flesh wound. Maybe you get nicked in the shoulder or you get nicked in the arm. They patch you up and you go back and you finish your tour. I did get a Purple Heart, and this was because a mortar round went off right next to where I was standing, and I go blown up in the air. I come crashing down on my head, and I got a bunch of shrapnel, but it got dug out. I didn't think anything of it because a man got killed and another man got his leg blown off next to me. I mean, as far as shrapnel was concerned, I was extremely fortunate. My point is that those things happen and you just have to flow with it and deal with it. And this young man that was killed, he was the very first casualty. And I remember that very distinctly, and it's very sobering. And I kept track of all of the guys, I know their names, that were killed, but those that were seriously wounded, I lost track after about 50.
Tell me about the first casualty, who he was and what happened.
Well, that was him.
Okay.
His name was Pat Lawler.
Okay.
And I actually talked to his sister many years later, and she told me that she also wanted to know if he died quick or what the situation was. She said, I pled with him. I was ready to put him in my car and drive him up to Canada, because that was what happened with a lot of protest. People didn't want to go to the war, but he said, no, I'm going to go and I'm going to serve my country. That's what he did.
Do you have a picture of him?
It is in the book.
Okay, I'm going to have to get the book. That's a touching story. I was going to ask you approximately how many men were killed and or wounded under your command.
4 were killed and 12 were killed altogether in my company. And the number that were wounded, I'd have to say approximately somewhere between 100 to 120.
Okay, that's a lot. Did you ever write letters home to any of the ones that were killed?
They discouraged us from doing that. They discouraged us from taking pictures. So I did not do that. I wrote letters home to my wife, and she kept them, and eventually they got bound into a book. But I'm not going to write and tell my wife all the bad things that are happening. I don't want to put her on edge.
Right.
I'm going to leave out all the gory stuff and just say, well, I'm still alive and we're doing good. And so far, kind of put a positive touch instead of a negative touch to it.
I sent you a 3-minute video last night. Did you by chance get time to watch it?
Yes, I did.
The one with the song?
Yes, I did, in fact.
I arranged that music.
Oh, good.
And
yes, I remember it started off with a helicopter.
yeah, and that showed the shots and all that. But again, for me, I've never been in combat. But after hearing hundreds of stories over the years, I feel like I was there. So I guess that's okay.
Well, you get the drift of it. You capture the atmosphere of it.
And I've told people, without having been in combat, I can look you in the eye and tell you what combat looks like, what it smells like, what it sounds like, what it tastes like, and what it feels like through the stories that I've heard. That's amazing.
Well, I commend you for your ability to comprehend and to appreciate what that's all about.
And in combat, I'll let you answer. I think you'll answer the same way I would, but are you conscious of God and country, or are you fighting for survival?
Well, we're fighting for survival. At the same time, we're trying to protect our freedom. We're trying to protect our shores. And the thing that upsets me the most, actually, is all these good soldiers were putting their life on the line, following orders, obeying commands, go where you're ordered to go, do your job. And then you come back to the world and you find all kinds of graft and corruption going on, and people in high places, they're not doing their job. And that's what hurts me deep inside. Here, all these men, including myself, and women, there were some awful nice nurses, great people, doctors back in the rear that are patching people together and putting their life, salvaging what they can. And when these, like, let's say, some judge or some attorney or some legislator or somebody in power just ruins it and makes horrible mistakes, I think in my mind, why in the world did all these people go to the service, protect the country, and come back and find out that the system is broken?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think the same thing. I think a lot of so-called politicians have taken the oath to uphold the Constitution, and they're doing nothing but breaking that.
I agree. At some point, common sense should kick in.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything can happen as far as any experience of mine, it's to try to tell the next generation, please don't make the mistakes we made. If we're going to fight a war, let's fight it seriously. Let's get in for the right reasons, make it happen, be done with, and move on instead of just, like, for example, that Ukrainian war, the dadgum Russian army stood on the border for several days, and nobody would smack them and say, get out or we're going to blow you away. And so finally they said, nobody cares, so we're just going to cross the border and go in.
Yeah. Do you think we're losing our freedoms today as Americans?
I do. In the sense of misinformation, in the sense of not observing, not understanding, and not obeying what the Constitution says. And we're a blessed country. We've got a Constitution that prevents a dictator. And so if we get a dictator, it's because we disobeyed the Constitution. The separation of powers was divinely guided, in my opinion, to prevent having kings and dictators that could just throw people in prison and tax people to death and just do all kinds of atrocious things. At least we've got this separation of powers. We've got a Congress, and we've got a Supreme Court, and we've got a president that are supposed to agree on things and stay on the right track. Mm-hmm. And when that falls apart, the country's going to fall apart.
Well, I love the Declaration of Independence because in there it specifically says when government becomes destructive, it's our right and our duty to alter or to abolish it and to throw off such government, mm-hmm. and to institute new government. Mm-hmm. That's pretty powerful.
Oh yes, this idea of being able to vote and express your views and Absolutely, you're 100% correct.
And I believe we're fighting for the same freedoms in our own country that our veterans fought for on foreign soil.
Sure.
And I use the word gullible. A lot of people are gullible. That means easily duped or cheated. And a lot of Americans are gullible. And that's why my work's so important, George, is because there are people trying to erase history. And I'm their counterpart. With my work, I tell people I'm serving my God and my country through the lens of my camera. And I haven't served in the military, but I believe my work is doing a service for...
And I commend you for that. I salute you.
Thank you, sir. Wow. I got to get a copy of your book quick. I mean, I can't wait to read it now after talking to you. So we're almost done. I'm in no hurry. We're fine. I just want to make sure. I could sit here all day and talk about combat, helicopters, men in the battlefield. Again, I'm thinking about all the stories, all the interviews I've done. And you are so good at what you're doing and saying. And is there anything, we're not done, but is there anything that I haven't asked you that maybe you wanted to tell me today about your experience as a commander in Vietnam? Or have I covered some things?
Oh, you've done a wonderful job of refreshing my memory and asking things that I could perhaps say that would be beneficial for the next generation to be aware of. But even though I walked on a lot of bullets, so to speak, and I didn't want to do it, but I decided I'm going to apply myself and I'm going to do the best I can. And because of that attitude, it has helped me throughout the rest of my life. You don't know this, but about 9 years ago, I witnessed a police shooting right in my neighborhood. And blam, 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 all these shots were going off, and I thought I was back in the Oshawa Valley. And I did some research and found out that there was a young man that was shot by the Mesa Police Department, and he was having an epileptic seizure, and he couldn't hear their commands, and he had a shotgun in his hand, and he wanted to commit what was commonly called suicide by cop. You wave a weapon around and the police come and shoot you. Well, he had a weapon, but he was having this epileptic seizure. The police came, and they commanded him to put down the weapon. He couldn't hear them, couldn't understand him. And so they shot him 6 minutes and 37 seconds later, but he wasn't killed. His eye was blown out. But I did some research and found out the police didn't obey the rules. The police didn't obey their protocol rules that are established under those circumstances. And so I'm the guy that had the guts from my military experience to stand up and say, listen, folks, it's got to be this way. So that's what happened. Powerful.
Were those officers cleared?
Oh, they were exonerated. And but wow. It just so happens that it's actually now being considered by the Arizona Court of Appeals, Division I, and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, and another organization called ASPOST are getting notices that this has to be reviewed, and we'll see what happens.
Good for you for standing up.
Well,
thank you. That's awesome. Have you been to the Vietnam Wall?
I have.
Tell me the first time you went there and what you experienced.
Oh, I was impressed. It's this great big wall. It's got all these names on it. My wife and I were there. It's in Washington, D.C., and I made a point to going to the spot. It's all chronologically established, and I found the name of Fred Gleam, and I stood by his name and had my picture taken.
Is that the first gentleman that was killed?
No, he was probably the last one.
Okay.
But he's the one that was my RTO, right. And he got killed the day before he was supposed to get on a helicopter and go meet his wife in Hawaii. Well, we had two radios, and he was the one that was the forward one with me. And the one in the back had the battery went dead. These batteries, a radio weighed about 25 pounds, and the battery weighed about 20 pounds. So it was a lot of weight. Didn't have cell phones, no. And the other radio, the operator came up and says, I need to borrow your radio. And Fred was such a magnanimous person, so cordial, so helpful. He says, I'll just go do it. I'll carry it and I'll keep it, but I'll go do it over here. And he made his move, and as he was going forward, he got shot by a sniper. I mean, it's just that quirky little thing. He was making a move out of the ordinary. I'll tell you another little story about RTOs. I only put in a medal for one person, and that was one of my other RTOs. And one day we were taking a break. We're out in the jungle. About every hour you sit down and you rest for about 10 minutes. Well, we're sitting down in place and we're resting, but he didn't rest. He was fooling around with his radio, and he flipped to another channel just to see what might be going on. And one of our sister companies that wasn't part of our battalion, but was not even in our location, they're a couple of clicks away, he picked up a signal for them, and they had just suffered a mammoth attack from a daisy chain. Now, a daisy chain is when you have all of these grenades lined up and they're connected, and if somebody trips a wire up here, the whole thing goes off, and it just decimated their entire platoon. And it damaged one radio completely, and the other had a range, but it was a reduced range, and my RTO picked it up, and he was able to do the relay to get help for those guys.
Okay. And
if he hadn't have been on the ball, above and beyond the call of duty, he never would have intercepted that message, and who knows what would have happened, how many more casualties would have resulted.
Telling me about the peaches.
Well, my wife sent me a care package.
let me hear it.
And it was a package, and there were a can of peaches. And I relished those peaches. I wanted to save them for a special moment. So I carried them in my backpack. And we're walking up a hill. I walked number 5 in the line. Got the first point man, the second point man, then a rifleman, and then another rifleman, then me, and then my RTO. And I was going to go up front to talk to my team of point men to tell them what a good job that they were doing. We were actually kind of taking a break. And when you're walking point, you got to go not only in the right direction, but you've got to go at the right speed, and you've got to make sure that you're going to avoid any attacks, that sort of thing. So as I'm walking up, all of a sudden, bam, 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 we're under attack. The first 2 guys were dead on the spot. The next guy got creased right across his forehead. That was Ray Fortner. And then me. And I got shot, knocked down, but I didn't hurt. I felt blood on the back of my back. And after we dealt with that situation, I came back to my backpack that had a big old bullet through there. And what I thought was blood was a bullet punctured that can of peaches, and the juice from the peaches is what ran down my back. And I knew it was wet, but I didn't hurt. But anyway, that's what happened.
Oh, man.
When you get bullets bouncing off your helmet and going through your clothes, that becomes, shall I say, pretty awesome.
Tell me about
Tell me the rest of the story about that. About the ill and bullying Fortner.
Oh. So they've got a military crest to a hill. We were up near the top. And when we came under attack, everybody hits the ground, and I was just beneath the military crest of the hill. I couldn't see the top of the hill, but I could see Ray Fortner laying there. And he was facing me, and I could see this crease right across his forehead. And I hollered up to him, and I says, "Ray." And he just kind of moved his lips, and he says, "I'm playing dead." He was right in their sight, and he was playing dead, so they went shoot him again. And so when I saw that situation, I told the guys on my right, guys on the left, put down a wall of fire, I'm going to pull him back. So they, so I pulled him back. Wow. And then on that same day, our captain sent another platoon up on the flank on the right, and they came under attack, and 2 more men got killed. We lost 4 men on that day. One of them was a lieutenant. Just so you know, in terms of lieutenants, there were 5 lieutenants that rotated through my company, and out of the 5, 2 got killed and 3 got wounded, and I don't know what happened to the other one. So the life expectancy of a lieutenant was not the greatest.
I've heard that, yeah.
We had another lieutenant, I won't even count him. He was a ROTC lieutenant. He somehow got through college and got a commission. And the only thing that we could allow him to do was to carry the whip. And he didn't even do a good job of that, so he didn't last very long. We figured out a way to have him go somewhere else.
Are there sights, sounds, and smells, George, that bring Vietnam back to you today?
Not really. I would like to go back to Vietnam. There's a place called the Golden Bridge, and it's up by Da Nang, and I've seen pictures of it. It's got these hands that stick up out of the jungle, and got a golden bridge, and all kinds of tourists go there, and they walk on that golden bridge, and there's a big resort there, all kinds of flowers and trees, and it's a beautiful country. You get out there in the jungle, and it's like a botanical garden. You're going through a cathedral. You got these 100-foot tall trees, and you got these wait-a-minute vines coming down, and you got the rays of the sun are shining through, and you can hear all these birds and see all these flowers. It's like a paradise. And you can't believe that at one time there was this vicious war going on there.
Tell me about the missiles.
I already did.
Yeah. We've just got a few more minutes. I got to ask a couple questions. I asked all the veterans. Number one, George, as an American citizen, as a veteran of this country, what does the American flag mean and represent to you?
Oh, well, to me it means every bit back to the Revolutionary War. We had to fight that war. It was a necessary war to get our independence and to be able to be our own country. And then I appreciate the fact that we do have a constitution. We do have at least the framework for a great country. And for that reason, we're the most prosperous, most free country in the entire world, but we better get on the ball to preserve it or we're going to lose it.
What does freedom mean, and tell me about the price for freedom?
As far as I'm concerned, freedom is the ability to just have your own life in terms of supporting your family, providing a livelihood, and to be free from oppression, free from all kinds of impositions, and at least free to get an education and get a job and advance and help your family, help fellow men, and have your free agency to belong to whatever religion you want to belong to, or pursue whatever career you want to belong to, or and a lot of people don't have that. Yeah. And we can be grateful that at least the opportunity is there.
Right. Well said. I want to show this one more time and then we're going to be done. But the Vietnam Jungle Speaks by First Lieutenant George Papa. Great. I'm gonna be one of the first to get this. So I'm going to ask you to do one more thing and we'll be done. At the end of my interviews, if you watch my films or any of my interviews, From day one, I've asked the veterans to look into the camera and just to give a salute. Can you do that for me from where you're seated here when I ask you? If you want to say something, that's fine. If not, I just want you to look into the camera, George, and go ahead.
Yes, sir. My name is Lieutenant George Papa, and I'm proud to have served my country.
God bless you, sir.
And I thank you.
I don't usually have the chance to do this, but I want to shake your hand on camera and say thank you, sir, for your service to our country. Thank you for sharing your story with me, and I'll be a good steward of it.
Oh, well, I thank you for that. It's been a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. And it's a window of history, and there will be future generations that will appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
And thank you again.
Okay.
And God bless you.
Thank you.